Today we're going to be looking at the Spring, a small-sized daily model from Thule. Thule has a tendency to take a pretty different approach from a lot of other manufacturers, both in terms of materials and design, but also just in terms of where they have so far aimed their marketing, as well as how they deal with distribution. In fact, up until recently, Thule strollers were really only available in sporting goods stores here in Norway, and their line is still heavily oriented towards jogging and off-road use. The Spring, then, is part of a shifting design direction for Thule, an expansion into the wider non-sporting stroller market. So let's have a look, starting off with some stats. The Spring clocks in at 9.5 kilos and can fold down to 32 by 45 by 76 centimeters. It can take up to 5 kilos in its shopping basket and 22 kilos in the seat. In addition to weight capacity, Thule gives further specifications for the seat, claiming that it's suitable from 6 months to 4 years old and can take a child as tall as 111 centimeters. But these latter claims are something that I would unfortunately disagree with, based on the setup of the lower portion of the seat. Though I generally consider a lot of the bells and whistles on strollers these days unnecessary, in comparison with just working out basic features in a sturdy and longevity-focused manner, the Spring seat still feels a bit sparse for me. Size-wise, the main body of the seat is okay, and as a three-wheeler, is even a few centimeters wider than a lot of other models from its class. And the canopy is also quite decent for coverage, being both extendable as well as incorporating an additional sun flap. But the problem comes with the lower end of the seat, which firstly doesn't have an adjustable leg rest, a feature I've come to expect on strollers of this size, and secondly has a very narrow angled footrest, which doesn't provide sufficient room in my opinion for the feet of an older toddler. As a result of these factors, I would unfortunately place the top age for the Spring at more around 3 years of age, and even then with a larger 3-year-old, it may be difficult to find a good foot position during nap time. One last thing to mention as far as the seat is concerned is that even though textile removal is not the nightmare that they had on the Glide series, it's still difficult on the Spring, involving the removal of screws, and the textiles themselves are also hand wash only, mainly due to non-removable base and backboards. When it comes to parent comfort and ease of use, this is where I would say the Spring excels. It's lightweight, it folds small, with a very simple and accessible one-hand fold system. It has a handle which is adjustable for both short and tall parents alike, and its shopping basket is large and easily accessible, which is rare on 3-wheeled models. Out of the box, the Spring drives wonderfully as well, which to be honest is nothing less than expected from a brand that has made their name producing rugged jogging and terrain strollers. We'll be dealing a lot more with this in a moment when we go over the mechanics, but to start with here, just know that due to the well-built connection of the front swivel wheel and an overall chassis structure oriented towards springy natural suspension, you'll likely be tempted to use the Spring on terrain that's a lot rougher than you should. And as I'll explain in a moment, this may lead to some problems. Now, while one might argue that problems occurring from this, from irresponsible consumer use, are not exactly fair to fault the manufacturer with, this doesn't mean that they won't occur. In order to talk more about this though, we must now move on to the mechanics, looking at the Spring top to bottom. Okay, we're going to go over the mechanics then, and we've removed the textiles in this case because we wanted you to see the overall structure of the chassis. It's a bit different than a lot of other strollers, most importantly because it does not have a rear frame crossbar. So the Thule Spring has a unique fold, as you know, and not having that crossbar is going to serve 3 positive functions as far as like the way they were thinking about the design of this stroller. And we'll deal with those positives before we get to the negatives, of which there are several, unfortunately. So the positives of that are, number 1, it allows the stroller to fold down such that that rear frame contracts, and thus the stroller takes up less space when it's folded down. Number 2 is that without a rear frame crossbar, you actually have a very accessible shopping basket when the shopping basket is on there, and that is a rare thing for 3-wheeled strollers. Usually because you have the seat here and you also have a crossbar, it can be a little bit difficult to get stuff into the shopping basket. The third effect of not having that is that you're going to have this sort of overall springy feeling because you have this sort of like tent pole or I don't know, sailboat sail sort of tensile setup here on the sides, which is going to give it a bit of like natural suspension without having any large suspension units. And while it's new and out of the box, that tension is going to act positively towards your driving experience of the Spring. Okay, now time for the things that are not quite so positive. We're going to start with something sort of simple, and that is this handle regulation mechanism. Now this is very common these days. You can actually see it functioning with the textiles off when I press on this button. A wire that runs down the inside of this handle, and it's going to go right under the lip here, is going to pull out this button, and you have 4 different positions. That is common these days. It is still a complex system. It is still something that breaks because where that wire is attached, in particular up here near the handle, can occasionally break. It's attached to a plastic button, right? So you can sometimes have internal problems based on the complexity of that system, but it's a commonly done thing these days, so it's not a huge problem. Number two though, these portions of the handle here that actually slot inside the other portions are relatively thin, and even though there's an angle, like the bar itself is angled in order to give stability, it's angled here as well, because it's thin and it sort of like goes in on the side, that is a potential area for breakage if you have an accident. In addition to the main bars, of course, potentially breaking. And we did see on even larger Thule models, which are pretty sturdy and well constructed, that sometimes because of the very lightweight aluminum that they use for their chassis construction, you did sometimes get bending and breaking as a result of accidents that you would not get on other strollers made of heavier materials. Also, regarding the handle, you don't actually have a decent crossbar holding the handle in place. You have this very thin bar, which is responsible for holding the top portion of the seat on, but there is already a lot of give right out of the box here, and this very thin bar is riveted in on both sides here, and this is one of the areas that I would suspect will weaken, if not break, early, a few years down the line regarding this model. Okay, moving down then to the actual central fold. So it's activated here, there's a safety button, and you pull up on this handle, which is very handy in use, but the way it's actually put together is there are a pair of wires, and those wires have to run all the way through that central handle and up into the central joints that lock in place. So it's a second wire-based system as we have higher up, and this one also, I believe, is potential area for problems. You can get grit in there, you can get asymmetries in the chassis because there are a lot of weak points, which are going to cause those wires to pull at different tensile strengths and so on. And anytime you have that sort of internal complexity, you just have the potential for problems. There's also a lot of riveting here. There's a lot of riveting overall on the chassis. So if you do have internal mechanical problems, it's going to be difficult to take it apart and replace wires or replace any sort of small components that have broken. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of a closer look at the lower rear frame of the Stroller Spring again. And again, the key theme here is that there is not that crossbar there. So what that's going to do then is to put all the pressure onto these joints here, these stabilization struts, as well as here, and it's quite firmly connected here, right? As well as put extra pressure onto where the wheels are, because there's going to be some degree of horizontal movement, right? So all of that is going to create like wiggling where the wheels are connected and stuff. The wheel connection is actually fine. But this area here I feel needed to have been done a little bit more sturdily. These are very thin bars that they have for support here, and they are riveted. It would have been nice to see screws there so that you could tighten it if necessary. Would have liked to see something a little bit more heavy duty in relation to these stabilization struts. And I do think you're going to get weakening here, here, on both sides, and I also think there's going to be a lot of kinetic energy put onto those wheels, which could, even though they're kind of well constructed in how they snap into place, it could result in problems later on. I would say overall, just the lack of that back crossbar is going to accelerate the amount of looseness that occurs in the chassis in general, if not breaking itself, unfortunately. Another negative effect on the rear frame of not having that crossbar is that they've had to put a relatively complex wire-based brake system. The wire has to run all the way up through here in order to get down to the other side. There's also no adjustment screw on such a long wire. It's important to put adjustment screws when you have wire-based brake systems, because over time, as you're using the brakes, there's like tension involved in brake lines between that internal wire of the brake line and the external part. And after a while, if you don't have an adjustment screw, you can wind up with one wheel sort of not unlocking fully or not locking fully, and you need to adjust that tension in the wire itself in order to keep it functioning well. So that's another point at which longevity hasn't really been focused on in the overall construction of this kind of strange design. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of a closer look at the lower front frame then and how the wheel connects in and stuff. And I'm actually quite a big fan of the way they've done all of this. I think that a lot of it is taken from their experience making jogging strollers and also making the urban glide and stuff. So it has some inbuilt suspension, again has a nice large wheel. It does have a swivel lock here on the side, just a basic sort of a setup for a swivel lock, but it's built of metal, heavy duty in its construction. And what I particularly like is the way they have fit the front axle into the front housing because it locks at the top, and then it has multiple circumferences here at the bottom where the plastic goes around the axle that are going to hold that axle in place and make sure that it doesn't move horizontally and damage the inside shaft of the front housing mechanism. So as far as the front frame and the front wheel is concerned, I think it's going to work quite well. Again, both the front and the back wheels are of a decent size for a stroller of this size. You do have that suspension built from the basic structure of the chassis, and you have the suspension in the front. So all of these elements as far as driving are concerned are going to suggest, again, that you push this stroller a bit harder than all of those thinner riveted points and internally complex and fragile mechanisms so on will take in the long run. So I think actually building it well in relation to the front wheel and the overall suspension might wind up kind of being its Achilles heel and will wear down the rest of the chassis at a quicker rate, unfortunately. So, would I recommend getting the Thule Spring? I would unfortunately say no, probably not. Despite a few positive factors regarding driving and comfort of use, I would say that the suboptimal seating setup, combined with a variety of design choices which decrease the model's longevity, make the Spring seem overpriced to me. If one wanted to purchase a Spring for light use for a few years, it would probably hold up, barring accidents. But I definitely feel that there are better options for your money. In any case, we hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, we ask that you subscribe, as it helps us to continue making videos in the future. Thank you.
We need your help. Like most of the economy, our channel has been hit pretty hard by the current crisis, and though we're doing our best to keep everything chugging along, times are tough. If you would like to help us out, there are a couple things you can do. Firstly, if you're using ad blocker, we would really appreciate it if you could turn it off every once in a while. In case you didn't know, as annoying as they are, ads fund all YouTube content, and in times like these, I'm pretty sure all the channels you enjoy and make use of could really use the extra revenue. Secondly, we have a Patreon page. And if you have the ability, signing up to donate even just $1 or $2 a month would really do a lot for us. In any case, thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the video.